I'm Becky. Sitting here in our kitchen, the morning sun casting a warm glow through the window, I can't help but think about how close we came to losing everything. A few weeks ago, I received a news alert on my phone that sent a shockwave through me. A 72-year-old woman named Doris had been arrested for causing a major ruckus at an exclusive retirement community, ranting about unpaid bills and a deadbeat ex-husband. When I saw her mugshot, it was like a punch to the gut. It was my mother-in-law. I showed the phone to my husband, Tom. He stared at the image for a long time, then slowly shook his head, a sad smile on his face. He reached across the table and took my hand. In that moment, I knew that our sanctuary, the peace we'd fought so hard for, was finally ours again. But it wasn't always like this. Tom and I used to have a perfect little world. Our home was a haven, a place of quiet mornings and shared silences. We'd sit at our small wooden table, sipping freshly brewed coffee, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. It was our sanctuary, a space we'd built together over the years. One fateful Saturday, everything changed. The day started like any other, with the gentle chirping of birds and a still, peaceful air. Then the phone rang, shattering the tranquility like a dropped glass. Tom's face went through a series of emotions as he listened to the voice on the other end. First, confusion, then a deep furrowed brow of concern, and finally, that look of weary resignation I knew all too well. It was the face he only wore when dealing with his mother, Doris. I'd always had a strained relationship with Doris. She was a wealthy, controlling woman from an old money family in a neighboring state. I was the outsider who'd married her only son, and she made sure I knew I was an unwelcome addition to the family. Every compliment she gave me was laced with sarcasm, and every piece of advice was a thinly veiled criticism. "Becky, this casserole is interesting. Tom always loved my version better, but I guess this is the modern way." Or, "That dress is very bold, dear. So much color." I'd learned to smile, nod, and keep my distance. Thankfully, the distance between our states was a buffer that made our uneasy truce bearable. Tom hung up the phone and let out a long, heavy sigh. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times. "That was Mom," he said flatly. "Is everything okay?" I asked, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "She sold her house," he said. I was stunned. Why would she do that? Her house was like a throne, filled with all her family heirlooms and every milestone of Tom's life. She claimed the upkeep was too much and the property taxes were sky high. She also said she felt lonely. He couldn't look me in the eye, focusing instead on a spot on the wall behind my head. That was never a good sign. Tom was a terrible liar but an expert at avoiding uncomfortable truths. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to be the supportive wife. "So, what's her plan? Is she looking at a nice retirement community near her friends?" I was already mentally calculating how we could help with a deposit. Then he met my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It was a mix of guilt and apology, a silent plea for me to understand before he even spoke the words. "Her plan is us," he said. The coffee mug in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. "Us? What do you mean us?" I asked. "She's coming to stay with us as Becky. Just for a little while until she gets back on her feet and figures things out." I was in disbelief. The idea of Doris, with her constant judgment and overbearing presence, living in our home, our sanctuary, was unthinkable. "Tom, no. We don't have the space. The guest room is my office. And you know how she is. It won't be just a little while. Once she's in, she'll never leave." He snapped, his voice rising with defensive stress. "She's my mother. She's 72 years old. She just sold her home and says she has nowhere else to go. Am I supposed to tell her to go live on the street?" "Of course not," I replied. "But we can help her find an apartment nearby. We can help with the rent. There are other options, Tom. Options that don't involve her moving into our home and taking over our lives. We argued for nearly an hour. I tried to be logical, presenting solutions, but he just kept repeating the same phrases. She's my mother and it's temporary. He was acting on pure emotion, blinded by a son's guilt, while I could see the disaster heading straight for our marriage. He accused me of being selfish and heartless, and I accused him of being a coward, too afraid to set boundaries with his mother. By the end of the argument, we were both exhausted and angry. The silence in the kitchen was no longer comfortable, it was thick with resentment. The issue was left unresolved, like a ticking time bomb between us. Tom promised we'd talk more about it that evening and figure out a plan together. I spent the rest of the day on edge, my mind racing. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't even hear the truck at first. It was the deep, rumbling sound of a diesel engine that finally pulled me out of my haze. I looked out the living room window, and my heart stopped. A huge moving truck, the kind used for long-distance moves, was backing into our driveway. On the side, in big gold letters, was the name of a company from Doris's home state. I rushed to the front door and threw it open just as Tom came running out from the backyard. His face was pale, a look of pure shock on it. He hadn't known about this. But it was cold comfort as the passenger door of the truck opened, and Doris stepped out like a queen surveying her new domain. She was dressed immaculately, not a hair out of place, a serene, triumphant smile on her face. Two burly movers hopped out and opened the back of the truck, revealing a maze of boxes, furniture, and a lifetime of her belongings. Our beautiful, manicured lawn was about to become a staging ground. "Mom, what is all this?" Tom stammered. Doris glided past him as if he were a statue, heading straight for the front door where I stood, frozen in disbelief. She looked me up and down, her smile turning into a sneer. For a moment, I thought she was going to push past me. I took a deep breath and planted my feet. This was my home, and I had to say something. "Doris," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "You can't just show up like this. We haven't agreed to anything. We need to talk about." She didn't let me finish. She held up a perfectly manicured hand, cutting off my words. Her eyes, cold and hard as steel, bore into mine. "Shut your mouth," she said, her voice low and venomous, loud enough for the movers and Tom to hear. "I'm not talking to you." Then she turned her back on me, her expression instantly changing to one of sickly sweetness as she beamed at Tom. She opened her arms wide and declared, her voice ringing across our quiet suburban street, "I've come to live with my dear son." The world went silent. The birds, the distant traffic, everything faded away. There was only the sight of Doris's back, the shocked faces of the movers, and the suffocating space between Tom and me. I turned to Tom, my eyes pleading for him to do something, to say something, to defend me. But he just stood there, his mouth slightly open, caught between his mother and me, completely silent. In that moment, a crack formed in the foundation of our marriage. A deep, jagged fissure that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. He had chosen. His silence was a deafening roar of allegiance to her. Doris, having made her grand entrance, turned to Tom. "Tom, darling, don't just stand there gawking. Show these nice men where the guest room is. The large boxes with the blue tags go in there first, and be careful with my antique dresser. It was your grandmother's." I found my voice, weak and trembling. "The guest room is my office, Doris. All of my work equipment is in there." She didn't even flinch. She simply tilted her head as if listening for a faint, annoying sound. "Tom, is that a faucet dripping somewhere? We'll have to get that fixed. I can't stand a dripping faucet." She spoke right through me, looking only at Tom, making me feel invisible in my own home. I looked at Tom, my eyes screaming the words I couldn't say. "Do something. Say something. Tell her no." He took a hesitant step toward me, his face a mask of misery. "Becky, please," he whispered, his voice low so only I could hear. Not now. Let's just get her settled. We can move your desk into the living room for now. We'll figure it out. The betrayal was like a physical blow. We'll figure it out. Those 4 words were the most useless in the English language. He was asking me to sacrifice my life, my career, my sanctuary, to accommodate the woman who had just publicly humiliated me. And he was asking me to do it quietly. The next 2 hours were a blur of chaos. Boxes were piled high in our living room, obscuring the photos and art we'd carefully chosen together. Her heavy, dark wood furniture was pushed against our light, airy walls, making the whole house feel claustrophobic. Doris directed the move with the authority of a general, pointing out scuffs on the baseboards, commenting on the dust on the ceiling fan, and critiquing the layout of our kitchen. She never once spoke to me. If I was in her line of sight, her eyes would slide right over me as if I were a piece of furniture she didn't like. I went upstairs to my office, my so-called office, and began to pack my life into cardboard boxes. My monitors, my design tablets, my portfolios, my inspiration boards. Everything that defined a part of me was being pushed into a corner of the living room to make way for her flowery bedspreads and collection of porcelain figurines. Doris stood in the doorway for 10 minutes, arms crossed, watching me with a smug look on her face. "You know, dear," she finally said, addressing the air to my left. "Tom always said this room gets the best morning light. It'll be lovely to wake up to." That evening was the longest of my life. Doris insisted on cooking dinner, claiming Tom needed a real home-cooked meal. She clattered through my pots and pans, tooting under her breath. The meal was, of course, Tom's childhood favorite, pot roast and lumpy mashed potatoes. She spent the whole dinner regaling us with stories from Tom's youth. Tales I'd heard 100 times, but this time they were used as weapons to highlight her central role in his life and my peripheral one. I felt like a guest in my own home. After dinner, I waited until I heard the firm click of her bedroom door, the one that used to be my office. I found Tom slumped on the sofa, staring blankly at a mountain of boxes. The fight I'd been holding back all day finally erupted, but it came out as a cold, quiet rage. "You did nothing," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She stood on our porch in front of strangers and told me to shut my mouth. She treated me like I was nothing. "And you just stood there." He wouldn't look at me. What was I supposed to do, Becky? Start a screaming match in the driveway? She's an old woman. She's set in her ways. Set in her ways? Is that what you call it? I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Tom, she's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Selling the house, hiring the movers, all of it. She did it all without telling us because she knew she could steamroll over you. And she was right. You let her. You let her walk in here and erase me." "I'm not letting her erase you." "It's temporary," he insisted, finally looking up, his eyes wide with desperation. "We just have to be patient." "Why?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Why do we have to be the ones to sacrifice everything? Why are you so afraid of telling your own mother no? What does she have on you, Tom? What's so important that you're willing to throw our marriage, our home, our happiness away just to keep her happy?" He deflated, the fight going out of him. He scrubbed his face with his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "I can't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't turn her away." "Why not?" I pressed, my heart pounding. I knew there was more to it than just guilt. "Tell me why, Tom." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of shame. "Because we can't afford to. She doesn't have a penny to her name. The sale of the house was all she had left. She wired the entire amount, $200,000, into our joint savings account this morning before she even got here." The world tilted. I had to brace myself against the arm of the sofa. The air in the room suddenly felt thin. "What?" I whispered. What did you just say? Tom couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, a picture of absolute shame. The money from the sale of her house. It's in our savings account. All of it. $200,000. She transferred it this morning, a few hours before she arrived. A cold, creeping dread snaked up my spine. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a hostile takeover, a carefully planned financial coup. She'd bought her way into our lives, making herself indispensable. Every argument I had, every boundary I wanted to set, was now meaningless. How could I kick out the woman who had just funded our future? And you were just going to let me find this out when? I asked, my voice trembling with fury. When I checked the balance, or were you even going to tell me at all? Did you know this was her plan? No. I swear, Becky, no, he said, his eyes pleading. I found out an hour before she got here. I got the alert from the bank on my phone. I saw the deposit. I was about to call you to figure out what was going on. And then the truck pulled up. It all happened so fast. I wanted to believe him. The look of genuine shock on his face when Doris had arrived was burned into my memory. But it didn't matter. He knew, and he'd said nothing. He'd stood there and let her humiliate me, knowing he was financially beholden to her. The silence in the driveway wasn't just cowardice, it was a calculated decision. So, you're her retirement plan, I said flatly. She sold her house, gave us all the money, and now we're expected to house and feed her for the rest of her life. This was never temporary. This was her endgame. He didn't deny it. He just sank deeper into the sofa cushions, defeated. Our house, once our shared dream, now felt like a gilded cage, bought and paid for by Doris. The days that followed were a nightmare of psychological warfare. Doris established a new routine with military precision. She was up at dawn, making a racket in the kitchen, loudly complaining about how my pans weren't seasoned right. She rearranged my cupboards, putting the coffee mugs on a shelf I couldn't reach without a step stool. She did our laundry, but everything of mine came out either damp or shrunk. When I tried to do it myself, she'd swoop in, snatch the basket from my hands, and say to Tom, "Don't worry, darling. I'll handle it. Becky has more creative pursuits to attend to." My work, which I'd managed to cram into a corner of the living room, became a constant source of derision. She'd walk by my desk while I was on a video call, loudly running the vacuum cleaner. She'd comment to Tom, just loud enough for my clients to hear, "I just don't understand what she does. Tapping away on that little machine all day. It's not a real job, is it?" I felt like I was losing my mind. I was a ghost in my own home. Every time I tried to talk to Tom, he'd wave me off with a tired, "Let's not start, Becky," or just try to ignore her. But how could I ignore her? She was an omnipresent storm cloud hanging over our lives. He was so afraid of upsetting the woman who held our financial security that he was willing to let our marriage fall apart. The worst part was how she treated Tom. In front of me, she was the doting mother, fluffing his pillows and cutting the crusts off his sandwiches. But when she thought I wasn't listening, I'd hear her little digs. "Are you sure you want to wear that shirt, Tom? It makes you look rather stout." Or, "I saw the credit card bill. So many restaurant charges. Becky must have expensive tastes." She was slowly eroding his confidence, isolating him, making sure she was the only one he could depend on. The breaking point came about 3 weeks later. I had a huge project deadline, a branding proposal for a major client. I'd been working for 48 hours straight, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. I finally finished, exported the files, and attached them to an email, hitting send with a huge sigh of relief. A few minutes later, I decided to back up the final files onto our external hard drive. I plugged it in, opened the folder, and it was empty. Panic seized me. I searched my computer, my cloud storage, everywhere. The final files, the ones I'd just sent, were gone. The working files, the raw assets, everything representing a week of sleepless nights was gone. It was as if it had never existed. I knew with a certainty who was responsible. I stormed out of the living room and found Doris in the kitchen, humming.